how do we build thriving, cohesive communities in a world defined by the movement of people? This conversation explores what pluralism looks like in practice, at the city level, in local institutions, and in this political moment, and what the Builder framework demands of civic leaders, universities, researchers, and communities alike. Hi everyone, this is One Question, a podcast brought to you by Stanford University's Institute for Advancing Just Societies, to explore big questions about what it takes for us to live together in a world where diversity is a fact of life. My name is Tomás Jiménez, and I'm the faculty director of IAJS, which drives solutions-focused research and partnerships for racial and ethnic justice. Today, we're joined by Eboo Patel, a civic leader, speaker, and author who advances the notion that diversity is a treasure and cooperation across our differences is the key to everyone's thriving. He's also the founder and president of Interfaith America. Thank you for being here, Eboo.
Great to be with you, Tomás. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. So we have a guiding question for today, and this is a question that kind of hangs over the whole conversation. How do we build thriving, cohesive communities in a world that is defined by constant movement of people that precipitates the diversity and what you would call pluralism that we interact with in our everyday lives? But I want to start with your book, We Need to Build, Field Notes for a Diverse Democracy. And I want to start there because in many ways, it's where the Institute started. I don't know that I've ever told you this, but when Brian Lowry, who's a faculty colleague in the Graduate School of Business and one of the founding co-directors of the Institute.
And we were undergrads together at the University of Illinois.
That's right. I remember you guys talking about that. So, fellow Illini. We were leading a committee of faculty to design the Institute. When we decided we want to have an institute that dealt with issues of race, ethnicity, caste, tribe, nation, we had to figure out what it was going to be all about. And I started reading a number of books that were not necessarily about how you put together an institute or an organization, but kind of frameworks for thinking about questions of diversity and democracy. And I came across your book, and it was a real spark. And so
thank you.
Thank you for writing it. And the builder metaphor is one that I've used a lot and give you full credit and borrow from your book to describe what we try to do in the Institute, which is really advanced solutions-focused research. Now I've had the benefit of reading your book, but for people who haven't read it, I wonder if we can start there and you can tell us a little bit about the framework.
So my first job out of college is at an alternative school for young people who had dropped out or been kicked out of high school. They were largely Puerto Ricans, Mexican Americans, African Americans on the near northwest side of Chicago. And they would come to this alternative school for 6 months and then they would take the GED exam. I was all of 20 years old. I had no experience in this field whatsoever. I was just a hair on fire person who was a critic of the social world, particularly the education system as it was, and I wanted to be involved somehow. That's how I wind up in this job.
Mm-hmm.
So there are 4 teachers at the school. There's 40 students. So the first day of school, every teacher kind of introduces him or herself and kind of gives 3 to 5 minutes of educational theory, right? So I stand up and I do my Freirean thing. I talk about the banking system of education. I talk about how they have been subject to a school system that has oppressed them and treated them as subjects rather than agents. You can imagine kind of the whole progressive educator thing from the mid-1990s. So I get done with this and I'm very proud of myself, okay? Very proud of myself for giving this speech. And this student comes up to me. His name was Angel Perez. I still remember his name, and I remember this moment as if it was yesterday. He says to me, Mr. Patel, thank you so much for your speech. I can see you're a teacher who really cares. He says, listen, this is my 3rd time in this program, and it's my 3rd time taking the GED. And if you don't pass on the 3rd time, you can't take it again. And I just had a son, and if I get my GED, I make $1 more an hour at Cub Foods. So I'm just asking you, can you help me get my GED? And I realized I had no idea how to do that. I had no idea. I had no idea how to be a teacher. Like, I didn't know how to help him learn how to read better or do math better or do social studies better. I was deeply schooled in critical theories about education. And I kind of knew that I didn't know how to teach. And so I was smoke and mirrors. I was substituting what I knew how to do, which was to critique, for what I should have known how to do, which is to get him a GED.
Mm-hmm.
Now, story ends well. He passes, like literally gets the minimum score to pass. But that was a real moment for me, right? And in the vast majority of our professions, if you work at a nonprofit organization, the chances are you're being paid to help a kid get the equivalent of a GED. You're being paid to help a homeless person find housing. You're being paid to help an addict go into recovery. And that is a whole different set of skills than critiquing or dismantling systems. And so it's like a real question. Are you able to do what you are supposed to do? Or is what you are best at telling other people what they're doing wrong? Small number of people in our society who get paid to tell other people what they're doing wrong. I think that there should be people paid in a society to critique. I think that that's important. But you cannot have 100 critics for every builder, right?
Yeah.
And our social change ecosystem has gotten way out of whack. And I know this in part because of how I was nurtured.
Say more about that. You said that the social change ecosystem has gotten out of whack. In what ways has it gotten out of whack?
Over the last 15 years, we have had a lot more arsonists than architects. The bathwater in the ecosystem of center-left institutions, which is what I am in, which is the institutions I started, and I think it's a very important ecosystem. I would say like it's Stanford and the New York Times are part of the center-left civic institution ecosystem, right? I think we have let the bathwater get dirty, and it has empowered a set of people who went after the babies. And I think a society relies on its center-left civic institutions. Here's what I mean by center-left. I describe my own organization, which I founded this way. If you are gay married, you're going to be very comfortable here. People are comfortably gay married here. And we also have Mormons and evangelicals who might have a different approach to same-sex marriage. They get to be who they are. They are not hounded or harassed here. But this is a center-left place where people are comfortably gay married. My main point is I think our society relies on these places. And I think that over the past 15 years, that ecosystem has taken on a critic mindset rather than a builder mindset.
What would you say to somebody who said that, in social change movements, people play lots of different roles? There's a role to be played among people who raise consciousness, who raise awareness. And then there are people who need to be the kind of builders and architects. If you want to take the builder metaphor, you can walk into a place and say, I don't like the way this is designed. It needs to be designed. It's not working for me. But I might not be the person to tear it down and the person to put in the new electrical wiring and plumbing, et cetera. Somebody else should do that. Right. But I can tell you, I don't like the house I'm living in and it's not working for me and it's destroying me. So how would you, you're like me, I love to think in metaphors and talk in metaphors. So, this may be a very poetic podcast, but how would you think about that?
In the last 15 years, to take your house metaphor, you had 100 guys with sledgehammers destroying things. And they got to places in your house that you didn't want them to get to.
Yeah.
Right. And you're like, but I called a plumber, but I called an electrician, but I called somebody who's going to put up drywall. And there just weren't that many of those folks. Or they were shouted down by the people with sledgehammers. If we don't have a theory of what went wrong in order to rebuild the institutions that we love, then the people who hate the institutions will have a theory of what went wrong, and they will use it as an opportunity to destroy. So I'm 100% in the Jill Lepore camp when she was like, what has happened? She said this in the New York Times in the Chronicle of Higher Education. She said, I feel a deep sense of guilt for not saying more when our campuses were caught in a chokehold, and
Mm-hmm,
when
mm-hmm.
we couldn't teach the way that we felt was required for what it for to educate people. She's like, I couldn't teach the way that I felt like I needed to teach, and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't say anything because I was scared. And there's lots and lots of people now who are saying that. And I think this is an opportunity for those of us in a camp that believes in some version of social change, which includes more people, which
Mm-hmm.
lifts more people up, which encourages cooperation across differences, to say the last 15 years was really terrible, uh, um, because the social change ecosystem was profoundly imbalanced. It's
Okay.
not that critics are not needed. It's not that controlled burns sometimes are not useful, but that is not what happened. What happened was everybody thought that they were Nat Turner when what they really were was Robespierre.
So if that's the critique of the critiquers, um, tell us more about the kind of builder framework. What does that look like in practice? If you're, and you have been, I know, in front of a group of college students or even faculty, like what do you tell them about the difference between what you see as having happened in the last 15 years and what ought to be?
Yeah. So, I mean, part of what I want to repeat is like I was this guy, and
Yeah.
actually like the what I am sitting in right now, the organization that I built came out of one of those moments. It actually happened at Stanford. So let me tell you the story. It was in June of 1998. I'm 22 years old. I'm a hair on fire young critic and activist, and I've gotten interested in interfaith work because I have this realization that some of the social change heroes I admire the most, Dorothy Day, Malcolm X, Mahatma Gandhi, kind of, in some ways everybody's list, Thich Nhat Hanh, were their most salient identity was their religious identity. And so I figured interfaith work was a way to kind of bring social change heroes together. So I go to this conference at Stanford, and it's boring. It's basically a bunch of senior leaders, pontificating about theology on panels.
I'm
And
shocked that it was a boring academic conference.
well,
Shocking.
I mean, the
No,
funny thing is,
sorry,
like,
go
this
ahead.
is what I do now. Like, I'm like, what do I do
Sorry.
for a living? I pontificate on panels, right?
Sure.
So, but I was 22 at the time. Uh, uh, I literally stood up during a plenary session and I threw my fists in the air. And I was like, this is boring. This sucks. Where's the young people? Where's the edginess? Where's the social action? Where's the kind of vanguard energy? Like, this is what I'm doing in 1998. And there's some shock in the audience, and there's a smattering of applause because, the young people are speaking out, and progressive theologians like that, at least in theory. And I'm very proud of myself. One of the themes in all of this is how proud I am of myself, of like being an activist and a critic. And as the kind of session is ending and people are trickling away to their next boring panels, this woman approaches me. Her name is Yolan Trevino. And she says, what you're talking about is very interesting. This idea of interfaith work being around social action and young people and having high energy. You should build that. You should build that. And she wasn't saying it she, like, her tone wasn't a tone of challenge, but I realized, like, that is what's happening here. She's basically like, why are you telling all these senior theologians to build an organization of young people from diverse religious backgrounds involved in social action? You should do that. And the voice I heard in my head is, or are you really not good enough to do it? Like, is
Mm.
really what you're good at telling other people what they're doing wrong? And look, you don't spend 25 years doing something that is principally responding to a challenge, okay? But
Yeah.
and that's what I've done for the past, literally since 1998, for almost 30 years. I have built this institution, and it begins in that place. It
Hmm.
begins in the idea of why don't you solve the problem instead of telling other people what they're doing wrong? I'm going to give you like an even more tangible example. So one of the organizations I admire the most, something called the Inner City Muslim Action Network. It's on the southwest side of Chicago. My friend Rami Nashashibi and I started around the same time in the mid-late 1990s. He's kind of my Muslim contemporary, Muslim peer. although he's much more impressive than me. He's a MacArthur Genius Award winner, and he's built this like $20 million Muslim community development organization, largely Muslim staff, largely Muslim board, helps mostly non-Muslims, which is one of the things that I find so inspiring about it, because in my mind, that's such an Islamic thing to do. So in its surrounding area, the Inner City Muslim Action Network is in a neighborhood that's a food desert. So you know what they built? A grocery store. A grocery store is a civic institution. And you can build a civic institution. This is a civic institution. Part of what I think is interesting over the past 15 years is all of the talk about systems. Now, clearly systems exist. But again, I think what I'm going to say here is a little provocative and maybe an area of disagreement. I think all of the talk about systems is actually highly disempowering. Because what can you do about a system except for complain about it? But a civic institution, you can actually build that. You can build a grocery store, you can build a charter school, you can start a nonprofit, you can do that.
Let's talk about that a little bit, and I want to kind of maybe recharacterize the context of the last 15 years just a little bit, and feel free to disagree with this, but I would say that no one particular political persuasion has a monopoly on the demolition approach to society's problems. So, if you look at the discourse, even the language across the political spectrum, it's abolish, eliminate, cancel, get rid of, ban. We are legislating in parts of the country bans on certain ways of speaking, teaching, etc. And so there's a real anti-establishment strain that's running through all corners, aspects of the United States right now. And so I'd say that there are lots of people who are wielding sledgehammers, and that's not a builder framework. And so, my characterization of the last 15 years would be to actually think about the demolition approach as being as owned by lots of different folks across American society right now, and it might be as a recognition. I think it is a recognition that the economic system, the system of ethno-racial division, of religious division is not working for them, and I would assume that you might agree with that. We live in a society of enormous inequality, economic inequality in particular, but all kinds of inequalities. And so those are, some people might argue, systemic problems. And I get the idea, and I share this critique that saying, we need to, end systemic, fill in the blank here, is a bit hand wavy. And nobody can walk away as an individual, or even groups, feeling like I'm going to change the entire system. So how do we hold both of those things in mind, that there's something that needs to be done in the here and now, and that what needs to be done in the here and now, and that your example of teaching in that school and what the student was asking of you, or the building of this grocery store in a food desert, those examples are like people addressing problems that people have in the here and now. But can we get too caught up in plugging holes and addressing small problems without saying, look, we need to, this whole thing is not working for us. We need to do something about it. And how do we hold those things at the same time without flattening or eliminating one?
Yeah. So so many things here, Tomás.
Yeah.
What I see myself doing is helping to strengthen the world of civic institutions, many of which operate from the central left, as I defined before. But I also have a great deal of admiration for particularly religious civic institutions which operate from the center right. Latter-day Saint institutions that serve everybody, or Catholic institutions, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I think we have a particular responsibility to be builders. So when people say to me, why are you, why are you so hard on your side, so to speak? And I don't mean that in a partisan way. I mean that like in a, I think of my kind of realm, so to speak, as 2 to 3 inches left of center to 1 inch right of center, so to speak. Maybe 4
Sure.
inches left of center to 2 inches right of center, right? Why are you so hard on that world and not on the other world, say the MAGA world? And my response is, the Joker is supposed to burn down the city. Why am I mad at that son of a gun? He's doing what he's like, he promised to burn down the city. What use would it be for me to be mad at that person? I am interested in Batman being better. We're Batman, right? Angel Perez needed Batman, like needed somebody to teach him how to read better to pass the GED. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is, I absolutely agree with you that there are macro level forces, that massive technology. I mean, this, we're living through a once every half millennium shift.
Yep. Yeah.
And at the same time, like, we all have agency.
I think that's what I'm maybe encouraging us to do in this conversation, is think about the tactics as the problem and how they're used for multiple kinds of political purposes, for for different causes. That again, no one, I think, has a monopoly on these things.
Those of us who, I'll just go through the list here, belong to elite institutions, of which I'm one, right? Like Interfaith America is its own kind of elitism, but I'm a Rhodes scholar. Like, people should expect things of me. People should expect things. Like, I think if you go to an elite institution, you have signed up for civic responsibility. And people get to expect things of you, and part of what they get to expect is you're an architect. You're an architect. And one of my kind of main purposes here is to ask the question, what is the purpose of this institution and this role? It's kind of a very center right. It's kind of a moderate conservative question. Like, what's the purpose here, right? It's a Yuval Levin question from his book, A Time to Build. What is the purpose, and are you fulfilling the purpose? It's actually a deeply spiritual question. Also, it's the Gandhi question. What is your duty, and are you fulfilling it? And in my mind, those of us who have civic roles, particularly in elite institutions, we have signed up to be the builders that other people then can count on. I think the single best example is Dr. Robbie on the pit, right? Like here's another like very tactile example. It's a pilot. When you step on a plane, there's an implicit understanding that you have about what a pilot's responsibility is. And it's not just about takeoff and landing. It's also that the pilot's job is to keep everybody calm. I think Angel gets to expect of me that if I'm a teacher in his school, I can help him get a GED.
Yeah.
And I that is what I think the standard should be. The standard is not, is Batman worse than the Joker? The standard is Batman living up to his purpose? And the truth of the matter is, like, in progressive social change revolutions over and over and over again, this is a pattern, right? And part of what I think is fascinating about the American Revolution and the South African anti-apartheid revolution is those were amongst the only times that the revolutionaries were able to establish a decent government. Now, decent for the time, right? Clearly slaveholding isn't decent.
Sure.
Clearly excluding women isn't decent. For the late 18th century, the United States of America was more free than most other geographies on the planet, right? The point is, General Washington was able to become President Washington. And in most situations, right? So in the French Revolution, you have people like Lafayette at the beginning of the revolution in 1789, but by 1791, it's Robespierre in charge. And then what happens in 1799? Here comes Napoleon. And I think a version of that has happened right now. You have a social change revolution, which begins in the early 2010s, right? That that doesn't actually improve a center-left government, which is an Obama government. It actually goes full Robespierre. And is it that surprising that in 2016 or 2024 you end up with an equivalent of a Napoleon?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I want to pull on
It's a fun metaphor, though, isn't it, Tomás?
But
it's a fun metaphor, isn't it?
It is a fun metaphor. But I'm going to run with another metaphor. So you talked about the Joker burning down the city, and we need more Batmen and Batwomen, and so we are at the Institute embarking on a new initiative called the Flourishing Cities Initiative. And it is trying to address the migration-driven diversity that is a fact of life across the world. It's a fact of the human experience. People have moved since there have been people. And that the movement of people introduces diversity, and that diversity, when not managed well, poses real challenges. And even it poses real challenges even when it's managed well, but it also holds enormous opportunity. And so if we are, living in a time when the city is burning down, in that context of, and I've learned, and it's part of the burning is a reaction to the human reality that I just described, right? I think you would agree that,
yeah.
And tell me if you don't, that diversity, it's a fact of life. We live with it. Yeah. It's a fact of life. And so you can think about it as an aspiration, and there's a version of that, and you talk about pluralism, we can get into that. But it's something we're living with. So how do we live with it well? How do we live with it in a way that allows everyone to thrive? And that's kind of the spirit of the Flourishing Cities Initiative, and also, amplifying and supporting research that is trying to show solutions, that's showing what we can actually do to address those challenges and harness the opportunities. But if the city is burning right now, and there will be a time when, we are living with the ashes, what do we need to rebuild? Where would you start? And what things could remain relegated to the ashes?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So in the United States, of course, we have a powerful experience of this, and it's my single favorite civic institution in American history, and that's Hull House in Chicago, right? Which is like 10 blocks from where I sit right now. Which is to say, we have this history of this woman, Jane Addams, and her circle of female friends, Ellen Starr, this like group of women who say, listen, we have this massive migration coming into Chicago, and we should view these people as citizens rather than strangers. We should view them as contributors rather than deviants. And in order to do that, they need a place to gather where their identities are respected. I mean, it's actually like, I think it is so, it's so instructive for our time. They are migrants who have settled but who are moving. In other words, their settlement is potentially temporary. They have a place where there's a public kitchen, where there's a kindergarten, where there's a playground, where there are baths, where there's literary societies, there's sewing societies, where people are able to share from their Jewish, their Catholic, their Polish, their Lithuanian, their Irish, their Italian backgrounds, their foods, their literatures, the things that they care about, listen to other people and cooperate across difference. And there are other examples of that across the country. And so that becomes kind of the mother institution for this whole network of institutions now, many of which are, for example, Catholic Charities institutions in local cities that proactively welcome immigrants and refugees from different backgrounds, are respectful of their identities, which is remarkable given that, you have a Catholic institution saying, we're going to respect your Muslim or your Baha'i or your Buddhist or your Hindu identity. We're going to create a space where you can feel as at home as possible, and we're going to nurture the qualities of contributing citizenship in you. Right? And there's a couple things I want to say about this. One is, this is a great example of how a civic institution becomes a system, because it is impossible to conceive of American civil society without the influence of Jane Addams and Hull House in virtually every dimension, right? Like in adoption, in childcare, in juvenile justice, in food safety, in laboring in workers' rights. They were a place that pioneered it locally with a migrant population, and those concrete programs become what we think of now as kind of our social system infrastructure. So it was built, 125 years ago. Of course it's creaky. Of course it's old. That model is still instructive. Can we build, and this is central to we need to build, to my book. Can we build a network of civic institutions that model better ways of doing things that then become systematized?
Yeah, I really appreciate that example, and I think it captures something that we've been talking a lot about the Institute with this Flourishing Cities initiative, which is that the idea that cities are kind of petri dishes of democracy. So 1932, Louis Brandeis says that states are the laboratories of democracy, and he's writing this decision on federalism, and he says that the state, I'm paraphrasing here, states can kind of experiment, and if the experiment fails, it doesn't lead to the demise of the republic. And so I've been saying that if states are the laboratories, then cities are the petri dishes. And I wonder if we could go inside some of the petri dishes that you're an ethnographer, you travel all over the world, you've been to dozens, if not hundreds of cities. Like when and what you just described, I take it is kind of pluralism at work, right? Hull House and Jane Addams and the movement that she and her colleagues spawned. And so when you go around today, tell me about where you see that legacy of Hull House, of building civic institutions that create connections that allow people across various kinds of difference to thrive. Where do you point at and say that's pluralism at work, and that's something that should become a system?
Athletic leagues.
Tell me about that.
So both my boys play basketball. One's in college now. Doesn't play basketball in college, but I have a 15-year-old, and it is the most easily the most cross-race and cross-class thing that he does by orders of magnitude is play high-level basketball in Chicago and around. And even though it's on a travel team, which you have to pay money for, you're still playing all kinds of teams from all kinds of places with all kinds of class and racial and ethnic demographics, right? And so, and the reason I say this is that this is an institution. A basketball league is an institution. A baseball league is an institution that requires people stepping up and contributing, oftentimes as volunteer coaches. So, and this is, I think, part of the American genius. It's the Tocquevillian aspect of pluralism, right? So I think of pluralism as having three great categories. One is Madisonian. What is the political architecture of our ability to disagree and still cooperate? It's Madison. It's the constitutional system, checks and balances. The second is Tocquevillian. What are the civic institutions where we encounter people with different ideas and divergent ideologies and cooperate with them? So that's little leagues, and it's PTAs, and it's 4-H clubs. And then the third is cultural pluralism, which is the fact that identities are deeply meaningful to people, and those identities become cultural expressions and often mixed together in America and new cultural expressions. Think jazz, think the blues, think hip hop, think gumbo, etc. Right? Like virtually any interesting form of music or cuisine in America, like two essential parts of a culture, music and cuisine, are mixtures in the United States, are mixtures. And identifiable mixtures. Like you can trace back the Islamic influence on the blues. The call to prayer has a bent note in it, and hearing the call to prayer over and over and over again by West African Muslims in American slave fields in the 17th and 18th century undoubtedly influences the shaping of a new musical form in the blues. Right? And so the point that I'm making is that is we actually see this in occurrence all the time in the United States. And I think part of my frustration over the past 15 years is, why not lift the good things up and ask the question, how do we do more of these things?
Yeah.
So American hospitals are a miracle. Like right now, 8 blocks from where I am is Northwestern Hospital, and 5 blocks from where I am is Rush Hospital. And there's a Muslim, a Buddhist, a Hindu, and a Jain operating on a Catholic at a hospital started by Presbyterians whose CEO is an atheist. And I'm just making that up, but it's probably true. Right? And that happens all the time. It happens all the time. We should cherish it. We should recognize it. We should tell the story, and we should ask the question, how do we do more of this? So I'm going to tie something together. This is why I don't think to myself, starting a grocery store in a food desert is plugging a hole. I think to myself, starting a grocery store in a food desert is building a model that can become a system. I think that there is something powerful about a direct articulation of purpose. That's it. And I think it cannot be said too much. In other words, if Stanford students, or Harvard students, or Vanderbilt students have heard it 10,000 times, it's okay for them to hear it 10,001. That if you have the privilege of going to a society's elite institutions, here's part of what it means. Other people can count on you to improve their lives. I'm not criticizing you. I'm not coming after you. I'm not calling you names. I'm just saying, if you go to an elite institution, other people should be able to count on you.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I think there is that we have an obligation. But I think this is true of all of us, and here I'm kind of maybe standing on a soapbox that I assume you would stand with me, but that all of us have a responsibility to care for each other in the way that various religious traditions and philosophies teach us to, and that, as you pointed out, when we have particular opportunities, those opportunities should be for the benefit of a larger whole, and not, we should not see them as just sort of human capital building opportunities so that I can burnish my own brand and take care of myself, but that I should be contributing something to something much bigger than me with what I have. Stanford and other universities are not institutions of higher knowing, they're institutions of higher learning. And being an institution of higher learning, and the individuals within those institutions have to be curious and ask questions. And so I wonder, what's one big question that's capturing your curiosity right now? Leave us with a question.
When will diversity work, which I think went down the wrong path, which I call demonized demean divide? It had the wrong intellectual foundations. It had the wrong playbook. It did some very bad things over the past 15 years. When will it be ready to get back on the path of the great American intellectual and civic tradition of pluralism, which is respect for diverse identities, relationships between different communities, and cooperation on concrete projects for the common good? When will that happen? And that's a genuine question, which is to say, I think that we are watching the fall of a paradigm that ought to fall, but will even the title of the work that paradigm said that it did, diversity work, will it be so radioactive for so long that we are unable to do that form of work in a different valence?
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's one of my questions. It's a very personal question. I'm writing a book on this right now. I've devoted my career and my life to doing a particular kind of diversity work. Again, like the cherishing of diverse identities, cooperation across difference. It makes me sad to think that, it makes me very sad to think that because of how diversity work has been done in recent years, the whole field can be radioactive to a set of responsible parties, particularly because I think diversity work is the American project, like literally, e pluribus unum, right? Like that is if you think about the American dream, one part of it is about economic mobility, another part of it is about individual freedom, and the third part is about people from diverse identities and divergent ideologies being able to cooperate together to build a nation. And I really believe in that part.
I think that's a great place to end it. Eboo Patel, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you, Tomás.
One Question is brought to you by the Institute for Advancing Just Societies and produced by Ethography. Producers Georgia Limcalco and Nicholas Leapins, with music by Caleb Liu.